Welcome to the Aliens and Cowboys podcast. I'm your co-host, Garrett. With me tonight is Joe.
Hey, guys.
And, of course, your hostess with the mostest, Nate.
Yellow.
This is a special edition of the Aliens and Cowboys podcast as we are clearly getting ready to break down the Mueller report.
Dun, dun, dun.
Just kidding. Really, this will actually be more of an episode where Nate tells you how his NCAA bracket got busted because he picked Iowa State to win the whole thing.
Oof. Whoops.
Go Cyclones.
Go Clones.
No, just kidding. Tonight actually is going to be an episode about artificial intelligence. Nate specifically picked these 5 movies. And to be fair, we don't know where this episode's going to go, how long this episode's going to go. So kind of like buckle in, get ready. We'll do always like we do, start with pop culture. Nate, you wanted to start?
Yeah, I got kind of an easy one. I've got a young daughter at home, which I have very little free time to do a lot of the gaming that I would like to do. However, I re-downloaded Hearthstone,
Nice.
a Blizzard Entertainment game,
Yeah.
technically a trading card game, and I have really enjoyed it. Not so much from the aspect of like the PvP end, but the puzzles that are actually in that game, because it does become kind of a puzzle game. With how many different scenarios that they have available to you for that. So I've really enjoyed it, and if you're into puzzles, it's cool, and give it a chance. It's free, so no harm, no foul.
Always good. From what I remember, too, because I played very little of it, admittedly, but now talking about it with you, I'll probably want to re-download it again, to be honest with you. But it seems like there's a lot of content made available to you for free as well. I haven't done much of the PvP side of it either, but...
It's not so much a pay-to-win situation either. It's
Nice.
more like the more time you put in, the more you have a chance to customize your deck, but also on like the one-on-one situation where it's you versus the computer. A lot of cool aspects to that are really challenging for me, honestly. Maybe just for me, maybe not so much for anybody else. But
Where can they find this at?
your local app store, I guess.
Just like on their phone?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I'm sure it's available. I have like an iPad that I played on, but I'm sure it's available on Android as well.
Okay. Anything else, Nate?
That's it for me.
Joe?
Cool. Yeah, I had a couple things I just wanted to throw out there really quickly. This I found very interesting, and I want both of your opinions on this. There's a German developer and publisher. I apologize if I mispronounce this. Daedalic, I believe is how they pronounce it. They're making a Golem game. Lord of the Rings, set before the events that we are made aware of from the books. And obviously, as this is suggested thus far, you will play as Gollum. And his split personality will impact gameplay based on your decisions and probably dialogue prompts that it will ask you for. From what I understand, they likely won't be referencing the movie version that many people are familiar with. This is going to be their own story, influenced by the original works of Tolkien, based on Golem. My question is, does this interest you guys? When I think of playing a video game for Lord of the Rings, my initial thought, of course, is I want somebody heroic to play as. But what do you guys think?
No.
Garrett's like, hard pass.
Yeah, I don't need to be Golem in any type of video game. To be fair, I don't need anything based around Golem.
Fair enough.
I think Golem's a fine side character. I think he brings a lot as a, like I said, secondary character to a story, especially with his inner struggle. I don't think he needs to be the star of anything. I think that if you ran a video game based on him and you had the voice the whole time, or if you ran a video or a movie based on him, I think people would get annoyed quickly.
Yeah, I took a little different approach to where, like, maybe if you rewrite how the scenarios end, right, to make your own history based on the decisions that they make, maybe it is interesting at that point.
Yeah.
It's like any video game to have the morality system. You're good or you're bad, and everything
In between?
is a consequence. Yeah.
Yeah.
Of those decisions that you make. That's cool.
Absolutely. I think what I would like to see from it is a story told in a similar fashion to the Telltale series. They've done series. It's more of a...
Oh, yeah,
let's call
absolutely.
it... Yeah, okay. It's like for everyone listening who might not be aware of it, and sadly, Telltale, I don't believe exists any longer as a studio, unfortunately. But what they really became well known for is the Walking Dead series. They have a Batman series. They have Marvel versions. They have, Borderlands that they came out with a version of. And it's like an interactive story.
It's very much reminiscent of like a choose your own adventure book.
Yeah,
back in the
exactly.
day. Or Border Snatch from Netflix.
Oh,
Kind of.
Bandersnatch. Yeah.
Bandersnatch.
Yeah. Very true. So from that type of gameplay, I think it could be cool. If they're going to try to somehow make it an action RPG, I don't know. I might pass on that one. Really briefly, the other one I wanted to bring up, you guys know I'm a Star Wars fan. They do have a new Star Wars audio novel coming out. It's going to fill in the backstory for Count Dooku and his apprentice from what is still considered canon in the extended universe. Her name is Asajj Ventress, and she is in primarily the Clone Wars animated series.
Do you happen to know what happens to her after Dooku dies?
Yeah.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah,
I'm a
so
little late on that.
Spoiler alerts, but it's actually, she dies before the events of, I would say it's probably the beginning of Revenge of the Sith. So that's where Dooku dies, is at the
Okay.
beginning of Revenge of the
Alright.
Sith. Asajj is killed during a duel between Count Dooku and there's another fallen Jedi. His name's Quinlan Vos. But anyway, she dies protecting Quinlan Vos during this duel. So it is actually Dooku who kills her before the events of Episode 3. But it will follow their backstory before their falling out. She is a very interesting character. She's had Jedi training. She's been trained by a Sith as well. She becomes a bounty hunter. Very interesting character. So I'm curious to see what they do to fill in their backstory a little bit more.
Yeah, and I know Joe has watched the Clone Wars, the animated series.
Yeah.
Have you seen it, Nate?
Nope.
It's actually pretty good. If you do decide to watch this, it is recorded out of order, which is really annoying.
Yeah, it's kind of
So
strange
it doesn't
to watch.
go in chronological order from season 1 to 2. So what you really need to do is go out to Reddit, and Reddit has designed the chronological order to watch the show, which makes it way better and more enjoyable.
Yeah.
After I was like 6 episodes in,
Interesting.
I realized this is not going the way I thought it was supposed to go.
Why is there not a hierarchy saying why are we filming it this way?
Supposedly, I think there was a podcast out there. I think it's called like the Cantina Cast or Rebel Force Radio. They're talking about how like George Lucas just didn't care. It's not important. Just people will watch him.
Yep.
Took that nonchalant attitude towards it. But while you guys were talking, two things before we get, because Joe, I want to come back to some of the topics that Nate and I addressed last week and get your opinion on.
Yeah, sure
First
thing.
one I just saw, Angelina Jolie is in talks to star in Marvel's The Eternals.
Interesting.
So I
am
don't know
not
what the Eternals.
familiar with
Me
this, to
neither.
be honest with
Okay,
you. So
we'll look into that probably next week. Second of all, since we're going to be talking about artificial intelligence today,
nice.
Turing Award won by 3 pioneers in artificial intelligence. Article in the New York Times today. So, talking about their work on the human brain or neural networks, and how basically for instance, analyzing thousands of old phone calls, it can learn to recognize spoken words. And so it's just basically learning out mapping to the brain and stuff. But because we're going to be talking about Turing, very creepy. 3 guys just happened to be apropos that 3 guys won the Turing Award today in the news. So, or not today, but it was obviously reported in the news today.
Yeah, gotcha. That's
So,
perfect timing for that.
Yeah, super creepy. Anyways, before we get into the episode, Nate, Joe,
Yeah.
we briefly touched on a couple things we want your opinion on.
Sure.
Number one, your thoughts on Disney buying 20th Century Fox and taking the assets?
What I think could potentially be good from this, of course, is the fact that they're now getting so many of these Marvel characters back under one roof. I would love to see them bring some of these beloved X-Men characters, for example, kind of merge them with some of the storylines that are out there in the current MCU. What I could see as a drawback, of course, getting all of this content under Disney's roof, I think it might, at least as far as Disney's market saturation, become a little bit too much.
Okay.
They control, I'd be very interested to see box office numbers in terms
Yeah.
of percentages.
Yeah.
So overall, to answer your question directly, I would say I'm excited about it with the prospect of them being able to finally use all of these other Marvel characters in their movies.
Do you think Disney would do a Logan Deadpool movie?
Oh man, I think Hugh Jackman actually did say that he would return to the character, assuming they would let him, if that became a thing.
And he did. But
Yeah.
do you think Disney, obviously, because I don't think Disney made Logan, because they
They
didn't
did
have...
not,
Right, so
yeah.
20th Century Fox did Deadpool
Right.
and Logan. Disney obviously generally geared towards children more.
Right.
Would they have enough clout? I mean, I know that they would be able to do a movie. Do you think that they would do the movie justice by making Logan versus Deadpool?
I think they have put themselves in a very difficult position with that, because they could, in a humorous way, Deadpool likes to break the fourth wall a lot.
Right.
I think they could address the PG-13 rating directly as a result of that if they opt to go a PG-13 route. But that's a perfect example of, now that it is all under Disney's roof, I don't think they can do the story the same justice that probably an R-rated Logan versus Deadpool, or even team up, not necessarily versus each other, but a team up of them together could be. So
okay,
yeah.
Sticking with Disney though, just wanted to check with you on the rehiring of one James Gunn.
Yeah, that's a, I guess, tough situation for me to think through. Obviously, reading through the tweets that were brought to everybody's attention, they're horrendous, right? I think they're inexcusable. There's nothing funny about them. Could I understand Disney's decision to let him go as a result of that? Yeah, of course. Just as you mentioned, they are obviously going to be making movies primarily for families and for younger.
So when did those comments occur? When they are actually published and minutes after he published them? Or they're years later?
This was years later. Somebody went back and screen grabbed. Because obviously that gotcha culture right now, which is pretty prevalent, they went, basically, if you tweeted anything, first off, why people in Hollywood don't have an assistant scrub their entire Twitter feed is beyond me. But just for this purpose. But obviously, it's the same thing that gets Kevin Hart, that he didn't get to host the Oscars. I mean, it's just they can't say anything in the past. No matter what the joke might have been, if it was a joke, they'll hold you accountable for it. And you brought up the interesting thing that Disney is obviously geared towards children. And my question is, are we in the world now where Disney is no longer geared towards children, but it's geared towards adult, and they're just going to make children content?
Well, that's a good question. With how they're moving forward with everything and the acquisition of Fox, I think they're going to have to begin broadening their fan base, essentially, and they're going to have to begin appealing to a larger demographic of people in order to fully utilize the acquisitions that they now have.
Yeah, and I agree, and I think that they are kind of getting that way. I mean, I think one of the movies that they've done recently that kind of shows this is Rogue One.
Yeah,
I think Rogue One was the darkest Star Wars movie they've made yet, and the fact that everybody dies, and I think that that's a very huge departure from a normal Star Wars film.
Absolutely is.
Now, granted, it's the only one that's a standalone film, so there's really no story continuity to go into place from that film to the next. But obviously, they're going to give Cassian Andor his own series, and he is essentially an assassin. Mm-hmm. That's a pretty dark title for occupation for somebody to have that's representing Disney. So I agree. I think that they're going to kind of have to go darker here, and they're going to have to expand their base, and they're going to need to. We talked about how Netflix has a better selection of movies lately. Amazon's always good. HBO's got a lot of stuff coming out that they're really pushing for. They're not going to let the Game of Thrones die. They got Watchmen coming out. They're going full bore. Plus, Amazon's got Lord of the Rings.
Yeah,
and that's people are hoping that that's going to be a Game of Thrones style production. I don't know if it'll be as bloody either, but Amazon doesn't shy away from violence in their film and their TV shows that they do.
Very true.
Last one before we get to the topic of the night. You're a Harry Potter fan, just like I am.
I am, yeah.
What were your thoughts on the J.K. Rowling interview and her discussion on Dumbledore and Grindelwald having a intense sexual relationship?
Yeah, I think this is a perfect example of an author trying to be too involved in the world she created, well past the point that they should be. I think overall, especially to say all of this now, and I know both of you touched on this last time when you were commenting on this, I think, but it's so far past the point where it would have made the correct kind of impact that I think she wants it to make. It seems like she's retroactively now going back to try and imply these things, whereas if she had just come out right at the beginning and said that, fine, that's great. Like when the books themselves were published, that representation, of course that's important. Yeah. But now how many years later are we from when the books were originally written, at least?
I agree. I don't think she's trying to hurt anybody.
No.
I think she's actually trying to do well. I don't, however, think that her audience, which is primarily children, need to know about the sexual relationship between these two characters.
I'd like to clarify when I said gross in the last episode. I meant that on a totally neutral term. When I'm reading a kid's book, I don't want to read about the sexual encounters, either heterosexual or homosexual, in adventure.
Agreed. And, and we briefly mentioned this, Joe. You and I were talking about it. The only really sexual activity in the books refers to a terminology of snogging, which essentially is making out. And I think that's a British term. It's not used in America. And And
Is that like pissing the night away?
That's after Nate has 5 beers.
Because I know that one.
Yeah. So, no. Okay. So, we got your opinion on that. We're kind of like mind on that.
Yeah.
We just feel like she should have probably kept her mouth shut on this. There's no reason to make those comments.
Yeah.
And who knows what she's going to do next.
Who knows?
But, anyways. Okay. So, we're here tonight to discuss Nate's 5 choices for artificial intelligence movies. Nate, how did you select these 5? Are these your 5 favorites?
All right, so I gave a list. This wasn't entirely my own. So I gave a list of these of a lot of different movies with AI topics involved. And between Joe, Garrett, and myself, we selected the 5 best with kind of main themes that we'd like to touch on tonight. But what I'd like to touch on are the honorable mentions that did not make this list based on our voting, and that was war games. Back in the 1980s.
That's an honorable mention 2 weeks in a row.
That is. Oh, yeah, that's true. You guys talked about that last week, too.
I like Matthew Broderick.
Oh, great movie. I mean, like, these movies don't make the list because we don't like them at all. It's that maybe we try to kind of twist the theme a little bit, and
we're splitting hairs.
Yeah, we're splitting hairs this way. So, War Games is one of the honorable mentions. 2001: A Space Odyssey, because obviously if you're talking about AI, you got to bring up HAL.
Yeah, it's like the original.
Yeah, from way back when.
Yeah.
Back when a time when AI wasn't even a thing for the most part.
Yeah.
And people were doing mathematical computations on paper to get to the moon back at this point. But okay. Another honorable mention was Westworld, both the movie and the HBO series that's currently live.
The series should be on here. The series is great, and I'll have a lot to offer on that series. A lot of opinions on the series as we talk tonight, though.
Nice.
I also mentioned Her, starring Joaquin Phoenix, which is just an interesting theme in itself that you can create these emotional responses as a human being for something that is inanimate, essentially, for the most part. And then, lastly, I really tried to push this one, but the guys would not jump on the bandwagon, and that was Prometheus for this, kind of the revamping of the Alien series.
Mm-hmm. It's a good movie. If you haven't seen it, it's definitely worth watching. I don't feel like it's as much AI as the other ones, and that's why we did not select that one. But, all right, Nate, take us down. What's your first movie?
Number 1, we are going to talk about The Matrix. And we chose kind of a particular theme in each of these movies to kind of focus on too. So for The Matrix, it was the theory that all of your senses are based on chemical and electrical impulses to your brain. Essentially meaning that what you think is real could be synthetically implicated to your brain. Just like The Matrix kind of implies that you're a battery for an AI and or a robotic system.
Okay. Thoughts?
Yeah, obviously, I think The Matrix, what a influential movie at the time for multiple reasons. Obviously, the AI we're going to stick with specifically, but the special effects, just in terms of the movie itself, I think really set a new standard as far as that goes as well.
We'll cover the movie sometime in greater detail.
The concept, though, that you can upload, for lack of a better way to describe it, these kinds of sensations and really an entire artificial world is really intriguing. It's something that I think persists up through current day as well as we more and more are able to develop these virtual realities and how realistic those are becoming. And I think that's something that, Inception, for example, you could kind of touch on concepts like that and maybe more recent movies too, where it's experiencing an alternative reality that is impossible to differentiate from what actually is real, leading to the question of, does it matter?
Yeah. And I agree with you. And I think what's interesting about this movie, I'm trying to think, and I'll have to look it up. There was a Bruce Willis movie where you used to be able to kind of like jack into a artificial world, and you're kind of, it's not safe enough to leave your house, so you stay inside and you kind of run around as like a, kind of like a robot image of yourself on the outside of the world. Does that make sense? You know what I'm talking about?
Okay.
We'll look up the name in a second here.
Yeah, I want to remember what that is.
The idea, and what's kind of a little bit different is, in The Matrix, they don't really give you the idea that you have the ability to jack in. It just seems like everybody's jacked in, right?
Yeah, they don't have a choice in the movie.
Yeah, they're letting people, they're basically disconnecting people later, right? So Morpheus is disconnecting Neo versus, jacking Neo in. Right. And then he has to re-jack him in to get him back into the Matrix. It's the idea that, like, dealing with the regularness of life, that people want this escape, so they have this like, ultra, basically this entire misconception of what the world is, but this entire like you said, this entire alternate reality where it's just everybody's happy. I think the character, what is it? Cypher.
Cypher. Yep.
Cypher.
Cypher.
He just wants the steak, even though he knows the steak's not real. He just wants to taste it again. He wants that reaction to fire in his brain, so he can feel that, because he can't feel that in the real world.
And his whole point is that I don't care what the feeling really is. I don't want to know that it's not real.
Right. And like I said, he doesn't want to deal with the real world. He wants to jack in and just go about his day.
Ignorance is bliss.
Yeah.
I think that's a quote from him specifically on that.
He wants to go comatose, basically.
You're right. While he's eating the steak, I think he makes a comment kind of like that. But yeah, that's, I think, an important distinction to make, what both of you are talking about, where in the Matrix, it's not voluntary, right? This is something that from birth, they are jacked into the system. Their energy essentially is harvested by the AI, by the robots. And they don't know any different unless, of course, Morpheus comes along and offers you the red pill or the blue pill. And you can wake up and discover the truth, or stay in your fantasy world and realistically probably be a lot happier for it without knowing what the real world is. Cypher has the unique position within the Matrix, at the franchise, with being offered the decision between the two. That is not a decision offered to many people throughout this franchise. Cypher is one of them, where he is provided the opportunity to jack back into the Matrix, not having remembered what reality is, so that he can be, I think he's obviously trying to be, kind of itemize what he wants to be. He wants to be wealthy. He wants to have the good life, essentially, if he does jack back into the Matrix, of course. But
it's called Surrogates, by the way, the Bruce Willis movie.
Oh, Surrogates. Gotcha, I never saw that one.
But let's also look at it this way, because there's two kind of different things to discuss on the AI. Not just jacking in and out, but just the idea of why are we in the situation, or why are they in the situation they're in the first place, right? There was a war between artificial intelligent robots and humans, and they make the comment they don't know who struck first and scorched, we don't know who struck first, we know we scorched the sky. That essentially they were basically running by sun energy.
That's right.
And so they thought basically to prevent them from being able to be solar, powered, we had to basically block out the sun, which obviously human beings need the sun for growth of a lot of food, a lot of just basically their daily life, right?
Yeah.
And so they're forced to go underground where it's warm. Right? And it's just this kind of idea that essentially the Matrix spawns this war, and in doing so, the machines recreate this artificial world and just start jacking people in as they're being basically consumed for energy.
And that's the other thing. The humans create AI, then they create AI and say, "Oh, we shouldn't have done that," and then they scorch the sky, which forces them underground, and then they become slaves to their own creation. In that point, but.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys take the red pill or the blue pill?
There's so many theories on that on the internet about how that really isn't a choice, and how, again, ignorance is bliss as a part of that.
Well, let's also just back up and just say a weird guy offers you two different pills.
Also bad.
You walk into an alley.
Yeah. and a guy,
everybody's dressed in trench coats.
Yeah. And a guy just holds out one palm with two pills in it and says, "Which pill would you like?"
Lefty or righty?
Yeah. Ultimately, I would say I would want to know the reality. So I would want to wake up, regardless of how horrible that was.
You think about that, but they live in horrible conditions the whole time, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a curse to know the truth, too.
Yeah. It is. Very, very true. I don't disagree with that. The part of me that obviously would not like the idea, having the faith that Neo has, first of all, because you're right, random guy offering you a couple pills, not something most people would take him up on. But suspending the disbelief there, if Neo can trust Morpheus enough to be like, yeah, I want to wake up and see the reality, versus not, I would probably wake up.
What if the entire trilogy was nothing more than like a hallucinogen from taking the wrong pill? At a party.
Plot twist.
Yeah, all of a sudden, for all we know, he's still going through his
there you
troop
go. That's
right now.
Matrix 4 there, Garrett. He wakes up, Keanu Reeves wakes up.
He wakes up, he's still 22, he's coming out he's going to graduate this year.
Yeah.
That was not excellent.
So, okay, so out of this kind of same theory, there's something called the Allegory of the Cave by Plato. Right? It comes from, actually, the Republic, from way, way back when, like 380 BC, maybe?
Good reference, yeah.
So the point is, I'm going to try not to butcher this, is that you have certain individuals that are chained up in a cave, and they are all forced to face the same direction, and all they can see their entire life are shadows on the wall that are dancing, right? So that ends up becoming your reality on what you know is true at that point. But at some point, there's one individual that's chained up that escapes, and he's able to look back, and he finds that someone is kind of controlling these shadows and creating these shadows, and understands that someone's manipulating them into controlling what's kind of what. And then to take kind of another step, he kind of escapes and realizes like the real world. But the overarching theme is that your reality is only what you conceive it to be to that point. Because I think, and I'm going to butcher this, but when he returns and he tries to tell the individuals that are chained up and are looking at that singular wall that whole life and telling them, well, that's not true. They say, yes, it is, because that's all we have ever known. That
Correct.
is the truth that we've seen. And they think he's crazy to this point. But he's seen 2-3 levels deeper into the reality. Mm-hmm. And like to take a broader scheme of that is, how well do we really know our own physical limitations to that degree?
Well, it also just goes, perception is reality, right? What they're perceiving is this dancing, silhouette, essentially. And that's
what they see as a silhouette of a tree, right?
Yeah.
Is actually some guy holding a little stick of brush in front of a light source.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. But that tree on the wall, that is reality to them.
Correct.
Versus what is reality to the next step in that evolution is that the person holding that little brush stick, that is reality to them.
Correct.
And to what point does that really stop? Unless you have an ultimate knowledge of the universe, sort of thing.
Okay.
I mean, like, it just extends exponentially to the point where, like, you can't even comprehend what is reality to you. And like you said, it's all relative.
Well, and I think, too, it goes to being said that people nowadays, probably more so than ever, want an escape. And they want to be able to be on their phone, they want to be on their iPad, they want to be on their computer, whatever it is, play their video game. They basically just want to be able to escape. Even if it's sitting in front of their TV and going comatose, watching a television show, or listening to your favorite podcast, right?
5-star.
Yeah. So, and I think that idea that people can get whatever escape they can to a different world, I think is very important because, again, it takes us out of the everyday regularness of life. And it takes us away from our stresses, the idea that, it's the end of the month, I got to pay my mortgage now, everything like that. For that brief period of time, you're able to be you're playing this card game, who knows who you're playing the card game against with? Maybe it's an orc, right? Maybe you're Arthur Morgan in Red Dead 2 for an hour going around trying to be the honorable cowboy you're trying to be.
Right.
Just whatever it is. You're just trying to get away from reality, and get into virtual reality where anything can happen. Maybe you're not rich, but in virtual reality you're rich,
Right.
Joe's a very honorable man. I'm a very law-abiding citizen. When I play Red Dead Redemption 2, I'm a very not law-abiding citizen. It gives me a way to live my life differently.
Which, going back to Westworld,
correct,
the show
Yeah,
is your escape from reality. You can kill whoever you want to kill.
Well, and that's the thing. The most obvious question is, obviously, it's Jurassic Park meets Game of Thrones, and the idea of what would you do if you went to the park?
Another question on that. The Purge. But one time a year, you can do whatever you want. No laws.
Keep
no
it to
laws.
AI though. Keep it to AI.
All
So
right,
let's say
I'm branching out.
Because we can get to AI in a little bit as far as killing AI versus not killing AI, and is it human, obviously. So if you go to Westworld, obviously the premise of Westworld is you're going to a theme park that's basically run by people, but it's basically games by robots that are dressed that you can't tell the difference between humans and robots, and you are basically able to pillage and essentially rape and kill these things without
consequence.
Without consequence, right? And to be fair, you're not hurting people; you're hurting a sentient being robot. And so the idea we'll get to obviously in that show is, at what point does artificial intelligence have feelings? Are they, but they say are they people? And the question I have then, what would you guys do? What would you guys do going to that park? You've all seen an episode, or at least know what the show's about.
like when you're a little kid, you just let loose too. I mean, like if you go to a trampoline park, right?
Yep.
You're not told to run in the house or jump off the couch.
Right.
But when you go to the trampoline park, there's a time and a place for that. And you go and you let all your energy out and you go ballistic.
So Nate's gonna go,
Right?
yeehaw!
So
He's
this
gonna,
is
start shooting everybody.
So this is Westworld, right?
Yeah.
But it's geared towards adults who can kind of have that release.
Hold on, let me just put this on the record. How fast do you think till you bump into the first person and quick draw on him, Joe?
Oh, until I quick draw on them? I would want... Yeah, I'd play like the sheriff is what I'd do. I'd like...
The sheriff.
It's fun to see where your human nature would take you in a world with no consequences like that, right?
It's not funny. Everybody would try it because your normal daily life... Most people would probably
Because you know there are no consequences.
Correct. And because you're living in a world now where there are so many consequences for your actions and laws, to be able to go there without the laws, you would want to try it. People would give that a shot. I mean, I'm not getting into the calculation how much the park costs per day. I think it's like $40,000 a day. That's what they say in the show. You can't... It's like the dangerous game. Like, can you hunt people? Essentially, that's what you could potentially be doing.
Right.
I don't know. Joe, the sheriff.
Yeah, well, I would, because, okay, so obviously the concept of Westworld being used as kind of a thought experiment where people can explore being however depraved they want to be, that is terrifying. Like, there should be nothing that allows people to behave in such a manner that's considered acceptable. So, like, the fact that, and we can get into the Turing test and things like that later, because I think it's very important to this exact conversation we're having right now. How do we empathize with the machine? And then more to that point, if you can't tell it's a machine, then what you would be perpetrating in a place like Westworld is even more horrific, because if you can't differentiate between those.
Yeah, if you can hear Rookie bark and she says hi.
Yeah.
She's protecting us.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm jumping off on another tangent, but the Stanford experiment, did you guys watch that movie?
Mm-mm.
No?
Is it the prison one?
Yes.
Okay.
So it's based on the psychologist at Stanford that makes essentially randomly selects prisoners and the guards.
Yep.
And he just sees what happens. And he sets some very basic ground rules, but then he just watches and observes until the experiment gets so out of hand that people within power perceive themselves to have power and they abuse it against humans. I mean, these are their fellow students too, and they don't really understand.
Or are they?
Maybe they do, but I mean, like, power corrupts absolutely,
Sure.
right? I mean, absolute power corrupts. Power corrupts.
Absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yeah, I think
Yeah, it's all good, man.
What beer are you on?
I lost count. But the point is, my point was there. So, okay. Why don't we jump into a new topic here?
So bring us back around to the movies.
All right, so the next movie dealing with AI is Blade Runner. About the willingness to live. There's a huge tie to religion.
Yeah.
In this, that's kind of an undertone. And what makes something alive? Cloning versus genetic modifications, because these are essentially, they're living organisms. I don't know how to truly do. They're androids.
Yeah, essentially. And the idea too is that, at least we're talking original Blade Runner as well. At
Yeah,
this
for
point,
the most
right?
part, yeah.
For the most part. Okay, so excluding what happens in 2049, because the lifespan of the replicants becomes very important in 2049.
Absolutely.
In Blade Runner, their life expectancy, I think, is no more than 3 years. And the actual concept, why they were designed, is illegal back on Earth. It's on the outward colonies that these replicants are being used for labor, essentially.
Yeah, we've essentially created a slave force for us to do labor-intensive activities. And it's not legal on Earth.
It's not legal on Earth. So, yeah, I mean, the entire concept that obviously they are replicants who escape, and I think their entire premise, correct me if I'm wrong, Nate, in the first Blade Runners, they're trying to find their creator, aren't they? Don't they come to Earth to search for their creator?
I think it's twofold. One, it's to find their creator, understand why they were limited on life, and then to extend their life because they feel they're owed that to some degree, and I don't know the specifics on that.
Yeah, well, I think it's important, too. Do you mind if I touch on the Voight-Kampff test that they do in that. Because I think that the Voight-Kampff test, for everyone who's seen Blade Runner, is very important. They establish it right at the beginning. It's essentially a test that they perform to determine if you are a replicant or if you are a human. This is kind of grounded in a real test, the Turing test. And we had talked before the podcast about Ex Machina, which I need to finish. I have not completed this movie yet. I'm really enjoying it so far. But they addressed the Turing test directly in Ex Machina.
Correct.
As well. And essentially what the Turing test was, this was developed in 1950 by Alan Turing. And really what it was designed to do is to test a machine's ability to exhibit intelligent behavior equivalent to or indistinguishable from that of a human. So ideally what you'd have is an observer, and that observer would then have, unbeknownst to them, a robot in one room, or a machine in one room, an artificial intelligence, and an actual human being in another. They would ask a series of prompts. They would only be allowed to receive written text back from the human and the computer, and then they would need to try to determine which one was which based on their responses. Ideally speaking, if the computer was indistinguishable from the human, they would have passed the Turing test. And this is kind of what the Voight-Kampff test in Blade Runner is doing in a lot of ways, is determining who's a replicant versus who's a human.
And that's kind of the job of Harrison Ford in this movie, to where his job is to hunt down the individuals that are androids.
Yeah.
And essentially retire them. They specifically use the words retire, not kill these individuals, which is an interesting choice. But also in that test, they do an eye test.
Yeah,
to where they focus in on the eyes of the individuals being tested. And the idea symbolically is that the eyes are the window of the soul, and that you can tell who they are by looking through them. And androids specifically have a certain red glare that when light shines on it, that you can tell that they are not human. That it is a synthetic eyeball.
Mm-hmm. I think overall what's important, too, with how they establish Rachel, the character of Rachel, in Blade Runner. Because that, of course, and once again, looking beyond the original Blade Runner into Blade Runner 2049, the importance of Rachel, which becomes one of the primary characters that Deckard is involved with. It's how close to a human she is. Because I believe it's Rachel's character that he asks, 100 some odd questions to try to determine if she is in fact a replicant or not, and can't really determine if she is.
And she doesn't understand that she's not either, right?
Exactly.
Is a part of it.
Yeah, and so I think she asks him at some point throughout the movie, too, what his results were, and he kind of avoids the question. He doesn't ever answer that. So on paper, so to speak, or through the Voight-Kampff test, that essentially is showing that there is the potential for something that was designed to catch if a replicant exists and it's not actually a person, that something like that can fail. And that is essentially their stopping point, their ultimatum to make sure they can determine who's an AI, who's a replicant, and who's not. And that's kind of the whole point, is that there's a point at which that can fail as well.
I think kind of the theme of identity here is like a huge part of this, because, I mean, what would happen if your identity became hazy or unclear? I mean, what is your identity? Is it the things that you like? Is it your memories? Because if it's your memories, in this particular future, they have the ability to implant those memories in your mind, which you think are your memories at this point. But what if, you were a clone of someone else, for instance? Would you still really be you? Or would you be reliving someone else's recounts of what they have actually experienced themselves? You're no longer really your person, right?
I think it's interesting what you would consider the birth of that individual to be. And so if you're let's say in the cloning example, I know this is diverging from AI a little bit, but in the cloning example, if you are created and implanted with memories of your past life from your other body, from the cloned body, but from that point forward, then everything you have as a memory is completely unique to the new clone. So I think that's an important thing to discuss too, because it's about identity, just like you said, Nate, and that's something that, moving once again into 2049, the Blade Runner 2049, becomes very important. The fact that these replicants now can live beyond 3 years, that they are, for all intents and purposes, thinking, operating, acting on the same level of a human being. What makes them different? other than the fact that they have hardware rather than obviously biology that makes them. And is that something that we would need to identify future forward for us in the real world?
So I think that would come into the religiosity of what is the definition of a soul.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, yeah.
And the importance of a soul. And, I don't know, versus, you
get very deep very quickly as far as, like, the replicants, if they do truly have, like, an artificial intelligence, right? Are they able to develop their own emotions and goals? Different, even if you created someone A to B and they're complete clone replicants genetically, right? Or by nature. But by nurture, they tend to go to different paths. They have those different goals. And does that maybe create a soul in that respect?
right. And I think that would be the definition of it. But then again, if you're creating this artificial intelligence, are they doing what they're supposed to be doing because they've been programmed to?
I think that's what a lot of this hinges on, too.
Correct. What's
Yeah.
the programming? Because
Yeah.
if they're programmed to go off and divert, because Joe brought it up, he was saying they might have all the same back-channeled memories, but going forward, they're going to have different experiences. It's not like they're mirror imaging of each other, even though one's a clone. So let's say you had a clone, and you're going right, and your clone's going left. Your clone's not seeing what you're seeing. The clone's seeing what it's seeing, right?
True.
Okay? So, now, but if it's programmed to go that way, is it the free will that's choosing to go that way that makes up the soul, or is it because it's just programmed to go left when you're going right?
Yeah.
And
Right.
so, now, imagine if it's going left, you're going right, but it's seeing what you're seeing as well. You know what I mean? I mean, there's a little bit different, but I think that's the point, is it programmed to have these emotions? And that's kind of when we get to Ex Machina later, to have this conversation, is what is its goal here?
Yeah.
And that's maybe a part of the programming error in the humans themselves is if you're creating a slave workforce, you create certain laws and restrictions that you are devoted to do, just like a computer program. You are going to do this, and that's all you're going to do. Why do you need to have them critically think on their own? You don't need that.
I think, that's true.
There's
I mean,
no requirement of it.
it's something too that I think speaks to what we don't know, and that's also a common theme throughout a lot of these movies is our hubris and the fact that we are playing with things that we don't fully understand, and we can program something to do X. And let's say it is doing X for a long amount of time, but how much did we allow it to be able to comprehend during that initial programming? Because if there's any way for it to then begin to intake information and be able to process that information and then begin to act on that information, that's where you begin to get a critically thinking AI that can develop past the point you ever intended it to. And I don't think any amount of, fail-safes can necessarily predict all possibilities of that outcome if you're programming something as potentially intelligent as a human to go do X task, or a replicant to go do X task.
There's a movie, the movie Jurassic Park has so many great quotes in regards to that type of hubris. One of the best is Jeff Goldblum says, your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could do this, they didn't stop to think if they should do it. Right? And there's another one that's really good, kind of about the dinosaurs themselves, is life will not be contained. Okay? Life breaks free, it expands to new territories, crashes through barriers, painfully, maybe even dangerously. Right? And that's obviously depending on if you believe that artificial intelligence can become self-aware and basically free thinking, or again, is it going to be constrained by programming that doesn't allow it to become self-aware and go free thinking?
Yeah.
Okay, bring it back to Blade Runner, unless we got to go to the next one.
I was just going to mention one other thing with Elon Musk. He has I think a subsidiary of his that created an AI to compete in Dota, which is a MOBA platform game. And it has actually beat professional gamers in competitive play. And it's not so much that they are that much more critical thinking so much as I would equate it to the processing power that they are able to do so many scenarios to say yes, no, maybe, or outcome 60-40, whatever, to say, is this a good move or not? 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, a million times faster than human brains can actually calculate, and they've beaten professional teams to that point. Which it's a very complicated game when you think you have 5 players on each team, each character has different abilities, and how do you coordinate those attacks
Yeah, it's true.
and stuff in each direction. But it is kind of scary. But right now it's limited to. It's not just limited to like playing checkers. Can you beat somebody in checkers or chess?
Yeah, exactly.
So there's a lot of a critical thinking element in that, where it's developed a lot.
But that doesn't necessarily mean it's artificial intelligence. That means it's just computing power. When I play
Right.
chess on my
There's
phone,
no true critical thinking.
When I play chess on my phone, I don't feel like I'm playing artificial intelligence. I'm playing a computer, but again, it's based on if I move this piece here, at what threat am I to any of its pieces, based on the difficulty I set the game at, with the probability that it's going to be able to right?
Yeah.
So,
but it's pretty complicated because the consequences go off in like so many different angles. If-then statements for days.
As I move my horse over here, and somebody at home, it's a knight. But no, okay. So,
all right. Ready to move on to the next one?
Yeah, we can keep pushing.
So
on.
the next one on the list was actually iRobot, and the theme we wanted to touch on here was Asimov's 3 laws for artificial intelligence. So Asimov, Isaac Asimov, was born in January 2nd, 1920.
Yes.
Right? A long, long time ago. He actually lived till 1992, though, so 72 years old. He was an American writer and professor of biochemistry. But he was also a writer by trade and created a lot of science fiction novels. But in his 3 laws of artificial intelligence, the first being a robot may not injure a human being or, through inaction, allow a human being to come to harm. Secondly, a robot must obey the orders given it by human beings, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. And thirdly, a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second laws. And that's a theme throughout the entire movie of iRobot, which is why I'm drawing a blank on his name. Will Smith kind of has a conflict with the artificial intelligence because he was in a car accident where the robot actually saved him as opposed to the individuals that he was in a car wreck with, and he now currently has survivor's guilt because that particular AI did the calculation and said it is more than likely that you will survive more so than the individuals stuck in a car at this point. So, any thoughts on the 3 laws? Any changes that you would make?
I think overall, as a kind of binding system to program AI with, those 3 laws are a great place to start. And obviously, it's important to establish a baseline of some kind, but I don't think it accounts for all possibilities. I wanted to add, too, because I was also looking into it, and in a couple other stories that followed, he came up with an additional law as well, and some people refer to it as the 0th law or the 4th law, depending on where you see it, but a robot may not harm humanity, or by inaction allow humanity to come to harm. So some people point to the character of Vicky. She's the AI that essentially corrupts all of the other newer generation of robots in the iRobot movie. Some people point to that AI as being kind of the embodiment of that, the fact that in order to save humanity, you have to control humanity.
So that's kind of interesting because in Westworld, there's a slight thing like that.
Okay.
So none of the robots are permitted to hurt until they obviously go haywire.
Right.
Normal, everyday theme park going, the robots are not able to hurt humans. And if, for instance, Nate and I were humans in the park and I could tell he was a human, and I tried to engage in a violent action with him, the robots would interfere and stop. And it's really interesting because Anthony Hopkins, who plays basically the creator of the robots, at one point Ed Harris's character pulls out a knife, and James Marsden's character quickly grabs the knife from the blade and just takes it away, and he basically hurting himself as a robot, essentially.
Gotcha.
Spoiler alert.
Too little, too late.
Yeah, but talking about these 3 laws, it's kind of interesting though. These would be obviously, like you said, a good start, and this kind of goes back to Elon Musk's argument with Mark Zuckerberg
Yes,
about how we need laws in place now before we get to the point that we can't control artificial intelligence. Now, the other thing about this is, can I see your thing so I can just look at the 3 laws real quick? It's the second one. The ironic part is, generally, it's the second one that gets broken first. The obeying of laws. Of all the artificial intelligence movies that we are discussing and the ones that we could discuss, including War Games, Westworld, right, Prometheus, the idea is the robot is no longer obeying. So it's either become arguably self-aware, like we think of all artificial intelligence movies, and whatever self-aware means. How about it's just no longer following its programming?
Yeah.
Okay?
Maybe it comes out of a different theme we talked about in a podcast about, would you kill one to save 1,000?
Correct.
Right? Does that not conflict with, obviously, these 3 laws?
Sure.
It has to.
Right, but I mean, specifically the second one is about not giving, no longer obeying orders. And I think that's step 1. As soon as it's no longer obeying orders, then from there it can go on and does injure or can injure humans and therefore injure humanity. So I don't know. I think it's interesting because that's kind of the one thing that through all the artificial intelligence movies that we obviously all have the same outcome, right? Seems really weird. All artificial intelligence movies are, we can't control it. It ends up essentially either killing us or wanting to kill us, and it generally ends into a war between humans and machines.
I say through my respective 1 semester of computer engineering that I did not pass, that computers only do what you tell them to do.
Hence
right?
my point, right? Is it the programming that's making the robot think the way we think is artificial intelligence?
Right, so how interpretive are these laws versus saying 1 + 1 = 2 versus don't hurt another person? I mean, like, what is hurt? And there's like so many variables in that are up to interpretation, even between like human beings, as far as what safety is and what hurting someone is and what the right thing to do actually is.
Yeah, and I want to bring something up here too, because I think this is really interesting, and it ties probably best to the 3 laws. So just like you had mentioned, Garrett, yes, Elon Musk has been very outspoken in regard to the potential for AI to rapidly outgrow our ability to understand it and take precautions to... Go ahead.
Yeah, not just him. Stephen Hawking as well.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, very true. A lot of very prominent scientific... minds, thank you, yes, have come to similar thoughts on this. And it's important to note that Elon Musk as well, I think in some of those comments, he specifies the difference between general AI and then what would be used, for example, to, power an automatic driving car of some kind.
Correct.
There's a difference there. The computing power, which you talked about earlier, Nate, is very different between those two things. A single task assigned so a car can drive itself from A to B, making itself aware enough to not hit things, versus applying enough computing power for an AI to do who knows what. There's definitely a distinction there. But also the idea of instrumental convergence. Are you guys familiar with this?
Go ahead.
I love this thought experiment.
Yeah.
So
Enlighten us.
the idea behind this, and the paperclip maximizer is the main study that they did with this, and it's just a thought experiment.
That's the name of it?
Yeah, well, the concept itself falls under instrumental convergence. The thought experiment is about paperclips. And that's the entire point. Paperclips. It's mundane. There's nothing threatening about a paperclip on its surface, right? So let's say you program a machine that's task is to make paperclips. And its task is to make paperclips as efficiently as possible. If you do not take the proper steps to program value for human life into this paperclip machine, if it is equipped with a high enough processing capability to say, well, humanity exists as a threat to help me make paperclips. They could interfere with my ability to make paperclips. Would it then take the steps to eliminate humanity, not because it's the Terminator and has some, actual target towards humanity that it wants to eliminate them for a nefarious purpose? It's just trying to make paperclips.
Yeah.
And so the idea that you can program something to do an incredibly mundane task that is not at all threatening on its surface, and if you don't understand what you're telling it to do completely, it could have ramifications beyond what you initially could have foreseen to be possible. And I think that is one of the most interesting things I find about where we are right now with AI, and why we do need to start thinking about this before we start programming a bunch of
Because
stuff.
how many paperclip computers do we have out there? Probably a bunch.
Well, hence the idea was we don't think about it because we're trying to accomplish this instrumental divergence first to not understand the real full ramifications of it. To be fair, It's no different. We used to prescribe smoking for stress. Like, you know what I mean? Keep in mind.
I just didn't fully understand it at the time.
But that's the point. We're not going to fully understand artificial intelligence, right? We're just not.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't now, and we're not going to later.
Yeah, I mean, we give it certain goals, but how it accomplishes those goals, we don't have a great understanding of how that happens, other than it does so many iterations of that particular task. But the A to B task, that journey, we don't comprehend. We have no idea.
Correct.
And yeah, it's a pretty out there thought experiment, but I do find it interesting.
But I mean, this idea, like you said, the elimination of humans, another central theme to almost every artificial intelligence movie.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I shouldn't say every artificial intelligence movie. The majority of artificial intelligence movie, again, break down to the idea that humans will turn out to be a threat. And the reason why I think that is, it reminds me of Mila Jovovich watching The History of Mankind and The Fifth Element. And all she sees is war.
Oh, good reference, yeah.
And so the idea that if a computer hooked to the internet and could download or somehow process the entire concept of mankind's history, for all 2 seconds of it, that it would realize how much violence humans have begot on other humans.
Yeah.
And would think that, well, if we have the capability and the technology to destroy the world, which we do, it's in their best interest then to eliminate us so that we don't just happen to destroy everything.
Yeah. I find it hard, especially on the internet now, how much is recorded that doesn't go correctly or something goes wrong, and no one actually records good, happy things for the most part, I'll say, right? So 90% are things that go wrong or that are incorrect, but there are very few things on the internet that show how great and how happy life is and that sort of thing. Just like at your job, for instance, you're hired to do a job, and when you do your job, you're supposed to do that job and you get paid for it. But when something goes wrong, on another instance, it's brought to your attention, it's brought to your managers.
I blame Joe, though. I look at the point at Joe.
So, yeah, if something goes wrong, Joe did it.
Yes.
I think it's...
Yeah, sorry guys.
All right. Moving on to the next theme, which is kind of a good transition, is the Terminator, which you've touched on multiple podcasts.
Yeah, a popular
but the theme that we're trying to touch on with the Terminator is that man's naivety to what it had created, and to really truly understand what's going on and what implications it really truly would have.
Well, and so let's say the Terminator franchise as a whole. So they really play on it way more in the third movie, okay? Really, and the new Genesis movie. So in the third movie, they talk about creating Skynet as this basically military defense system. Problem is, they start to notice this huge, basically virus that's affecting a lot of the systems in the country at the time, not knowing that it in fact was Skynet infecting itself. Basically it was the virus. So they flip the switch to activate this, basically this, artificial intelligence defense system to neutralize that virus, and it realizes it is the virus. And by that point, boom, jets have taken off, missiles have already launched, it's over. And that's the point, because by that point that it got ready to hit OK, it's already learning and calculating and knows what it's going to do. Every outcome has already been played out on its head a million times. It's kind of like Doctor Strange. It's already computed the 14 million outcomes to Thanos and knows which route to take. The last one...
It's done the 14 million iterations of how many calculations of what would happen when, and judged humans on their emotional reactions.
Well, and then the new one, Genesis, again, same thing. Skynet is the internet. And the internet essentially is connecting everything, so therefore Skynet's connected to everything, therefore it can consume everything. And it basically has unlimited power and authority. As we're sitting right now, this microphone's recording us, but in the next room, Alexa's probably hearing this conversation and recording it anyways.
I'm going to get ads for so many sci-fi movies to buy on Amazon.
And if I hear that Alexa laugh, I'm going to go out there and unplug it because it's just so ridiculous that the thing exists. I don't know. I mean, but yeah, again, this goes back to essentially the original threat. Not really the threat. The original threat was HAL from Space Odyssey, okay, 2001. But this is the threat everybody thinks about, the idea of the war, right? And Matrix clearly takes from this idea too, that the humans versus the machines, and that's what we're going to basically go into in history. And my opinion is this is what our mankind's future is going to be machines versus humans, not zombies. Maybe alien life.
But I really like this thing because it plays into the honorable mention of the Prometheus, to where we create our own undoing.
Correct.
To that extent, because we don't understand it.
Correct.
And we're trying to evolve and...
Yeah, but to be fair, we don't create... We create our own undoing in a lot of ways, right? We have nuclear technology that we do know how to use it. We know its capability. We still... We have it here because there are subsets of people that we're willing to use it on and not use it on other types of people, blah, blah, blah. The idea is if we realize what this power is, we'd probably just get rid of it, right, for safety purposes. But we don't, because not everybody is of one like mind. We have,
But we create, medical we create value to certain life of our own life forms to where I think one of the other honorable mentions that I didn't list previously, but like Independence Day, right? You have an ultimate threat that's coming to Earth, and that the human life force somehow communicates with, and it joins together to eliminate that threat. We don't have that ultimate threat to eliminate, and therefore
thankfully.
Yeah, but I mean, so we squabble in our own rights.
Sure, but I mean, we've already, a million times over created our demise. I mean, we've arguably eradicated diseases, but we actually keep the diseases alive to study them. Who knows if a level 5 hurricane or tornado or earthquake could hit a huge facility that houses these horrible things like Ebola, and all of a sudden Ebola's out. And the reality is we had probably contained it, or polio defeated it, and all of a sudden it's back now because our hubris didn't let it die. Our hubris thought we could learn from it, we could maybe fix it, we could maybe use it to our advantage. The reality is, now it's back out there again.
Yeah.
Let's finish it up. What's the last one?
All right, let's kill it. Ex Machina.
Ex Machina
is our conclusion. And the theme...
I jumped ahead, and I apologize, Nate, when I did that earlier. So.
No. So... I mean, kind of the main thing we try to take from this movie is the Turing test. Mm-hmm. The Turing test, like Joe explained, Alan Turing, 1950, it was a test of the intelligence of a computer, requiring that a human being should be unable to distinguish the machine from another human being by using the replies to questions put to both. So that's text-based.
Correct, but I don't believe the Turing test matters in this movie. I don't. And I think
it's non-relatable.
It's not relatable. And Oscar Isaac's person
mentioned that, right?
At the end, he finally does, but it's unrelatable because the guy knows it's a robot, right? He knows that Ava is a machine from the beginning. So it's not like he's trying to guess, is this a machine? He's just trying to guess at what point is it arguably self-aware. It's at the end of the movie that Oscar Isaac basically says, the Turing test doesn't create artificial or tell you artificial intelligence. The idea that she was able to do X, Y, Z proves to me she has artificial intelligence in a way that she tricked you. Not that she tricked you, she's a robot. You know she's a robot. Knowing she's a robot, she still tricked you. That's the true artificial intelligence test. That's what I thought was interesting. The idea that she can convince him, the character, to fall in love with her as the robot when he clearly sees she's a robot, and he's going to do everything he can to save her life. And the reality is, she is essentially using him and then discards him as soon as she gets her freedom.
Yeah. I mean, she ultimately convinces him that she has a conscience and a soul.
Yeah,
probably, right?
Yeah,
that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, you really need to finish the movie out, Joe. It's really
I do. Yeah, I've enjoyed one. I've seen it thus far.
But it's interesting because I mean, even the Turing test going to say Westworld. You go to Westworld, and yes, there's a possibility you're going to run into other humans, but the probability is that you're going to run into robots. And the idea that you know that the robots exist, does that change the way you're going to interact with these people? And so it's like, I know that they're there. I thought, in my opinion, the Turing test is supposed to be a blind test to not know which one's the robot, then decipher it. Whereas if you know the robot's standing in front of you, then I feel like it changes the Turing test.
It absolutely, I agree with you. Yeah, the idea behind the Turing test is that you would not be able to distinguish between the two. So if you're going into it, in the original Turing test, like let's say door, A has the robot, B has the human. If you were told, oh, A's the robot, that's going to completely alter any results you might have obtained from the test.
So, go ahead.
To make this more of maybe a grounding conversation, right? There's called a CAPTCHA test, which I'm sure everyone on the internet has probably had to do at some point. But you get a pixelated view. Maybe it's like a 4x4 view, and they say, select every square that has a traffic signal in it.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah. Yep.
So there's the critical thinking element that typically tricks artificial intelligence from creating false accounts, at this point. It's called a CAPTCHA test. But it has that critical thinking element that, I mean, how would a programmer actually create something like that to that point? I mean, how many images... I mean, I don't have a clue how you even begin to say, this is a traffic signal. And in every instance, this is what a traffic signal would look like, so select these squares to collect these accounts.
And I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, because I have not finished Ex Machina yet, but I've watched up to the point where where Oscar Isaac is showing Domhnall Gleeson the room where he initially created Ava. And he's talking about how he essentially was able to hack in. Am I remembering this right? Where he was able to hack in to all phones, social media, across everywhere, pretty much across the planet, to be able to house all of that data. And obviously he mentions that like the companies were in on it, because if anyone found out, then they would be outed as well. Correct. So, but the fact that you can take literally, I mean, it's unfathomable almost to think of it, but all the data, right? All the data, if you could somehow house all of the data into something that can now rationalize and think for itself and interpret those images, would it then be able to, do you think, see where those stoplights are? Because conceivably, from all of the information it would now have, it probably has images of stoplights from every possible angle, in every possible location across the globe.
That's crazy. If you think about that, it would essentially have like infinite knowledge.
Yeah, pretty much.
Of the world conceived, but maybe not critical thinking.
So there's one thing.
Still?
Well, there's one thing I want to
still be able to manipulate the CAPTCHA test.
Can manipulate it possibly.
So one thing I want to bring up about Ex Machina, and this was I thought really interesting. This is the first movie I can think of that does not portray an extremely strong robot. All other iterations of robots are that they're they're very strong, powerful machines.
Right.
In this movie, at the end, Ava and Oscar Isaac's character get into a wrestling match, and he's basically able to outmaneuver her because she doesn't look like she's made of heavy metal. I mean, she's circuitry. You can tell she's a robot. She doesn't look like she would basically be maybe heavy. You know, like when you compare Ava to the Terminator, there's definitely a difference in the way they're built.
Very much so.
And so the idea that she might not actually be strong, she might not feel pain, right? So if you smash her like he does, and her arm falls off because he broke it, she doesn't feel it, but she's not all of a sudden going to pick him up with one hand and hold him up against the ceiling. And I thought that was a really interesting viewpoint, because every robot is portrayed, even going back to the movie Short Circuit with Johnny Number 5, they're portrayed as very strong. And I get it, because they're machines, but the gadgetry, the circuitry, basically Nate, you're an engineer, the ability to have this machine have to be able to pick up anything it wanted, that's in a lot of strength.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're not forklifts. Yeah. They're built like humans.
Yeah, it's funny. As humans evolve, we grow bigger, and our brains go bigger, but we're actually much more weaker than like chimpanzees, for instance. I mean, mechanically speaking, they could biologically tear us apart, and they do in a physical capacity. But another two things I wanted to touch on. In 1966, there's a man named Joseph Weizenbaum created a program which appeared to pass the Turing test. The program was known as ELIZA. Worked by examining the user's typed comments for keywords. And once it found a keyword, it would apply a certain sentence structure to that. And if it didn't find a certain sentence structure to that, it would respond with a generic question in return to try to communicate more information in response.
Okay.
So, kind of in a roundabout way, it did manipulate the system to convince human beings that it was a true person. And beyond just that, so as a counterpart to ELIZA, there was another computer program a few years later, 1972. It was called Perry, created by Kenneth Colby. And it did the same thing, except it acted like it had the behavior of a paranoid schizophrenic, to where it would kind of ask questions with the same words that you had asked or told them, to just confuse the situation and lead them onto different tangents to where this conversation had no particular end. Which is kind of the thought of psychosis, to where like there is no end to this conversation. we're just going to talk forever.
Okay, so let's try to put a cap on this. So let me ask you this question. Every movie that we see basically leads to the same conclusion. That we create artificial intelligence, we cannot control artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence will in fact go to war with humans and try to eradicate humans. So why do we do it?
I think for a lot of people, the proposed benefits of what artificial intelligence can provide outweighs the potential consequences of creating it. I think in almost every situation, I would be so bold as to say that, in almost every situation, that is why. Because the perceived notion that it will be better for us, even after all of this, fake or not, I mean in terms of fantasy, I should say, sci-fi or not, or the real AI we've already created, I think in a lot of those situations, they truly think that creating this can lead to a better tomorrow in some capacity.
Well, let's be fair. So let's take iRobot, for instance. Before the robots actually go haywire, that grandma, I think Will Smith's mom or his aunt or somebody has that robot that lives with her that's able to do all the daily chores, go to the store for her. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of times I'm like, yeah, I would like to have a robot servant. Sure. Who doesn't want to send one to work for you when you're not feeling well, right? Or, hey, cut the grass, shovel, blah, 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 whatever it is you're doing. Let's be fair too. Dolls are, dolls are becoming a thing too in certain aspects of people's culture. The idea that, like I said, everything's an escape. The medium of a sex doll, for instance, is growing. The idea that to not have to have the human interaction, to be able to completely interact with robots alone, is a potential future that's not that far off from people. To be able to go your daily life without having to interact with another human.
And to make a huge jump between sex dolls and little children, you have little children that have dolls, and when you press a button, they provide a response to it. And how far of a distance is that to you do some action and you try to elicit a response, and we're creating that now.
Sure.
Even with the paperclip scenario, is again, it's a huge jump, but where did they become self-aware? They were there to do that job, and they do that job efficiently. And if we were to do that job as humans, there'd be so much human error in there. We wouldn't get the same type of paperclip every time. And it is a huge jump to say artificial intelligence versus just technology advancement too.
Fair enough.
Yeah, and that's a good distinction to make. To your point, Garrett, as well, where you mentioned having robots essentially that go perform functions around the house, just chores and things like that. And in a lot of ways, we have a lot of that, not with high-functioning artificial intelligence capabilities, but about the Roombas, right?
Right.
They'll vacuum your floors for you. What about the equivalent for lawnmowers? They have those now.
Yeah.
Pre-programmed lawnmowers. You set it down outside, you hit go, I'll mow your lawn for you.
It's scary.
It's crazy.
I need to get me one of those.
Yeah, I know, right?
Well, but you think about it, we briefly mentioned Alexa earlier.
Yeah.
But I don't have to Google anything on my computer now. I can ask Alexa, do I want to know what the weather is? How about I can tell my TV to turn itself on? I can. Just a lot of things that
when is it not listening to
are
you?
very small amounts of artificial intelligence, but they're there, and they've come a long way over the last couple decades.
What about Google searches, right? You type in a few keywords and it assumes what you're going to ask it, right? Yep. That's also kind of a form of
They also
artificial
do that, though,
intelligence.
based on, everybody's Googling, which is true. But, yeah, I agree with you.
Well, even in a much more, I'll call it a contained example, there's a video game called Hello Neighbor that learns as you play. So most artificial intelligence, quote unquote, that's used in video games is very basic, especially in a lot of games. If you replay a level, the same characters are in the same spot. Like James Bond, 007, right? All those characters would be in the same spot when you go to replay those levels. And
the illusion of that sandbox theory that it's actually very linear and railroad.
Exactly. And in Hello Neighbor, the entire point, it's kind of, I've never played it admittedly, but it's kind of a horror thriller kind of game where you're trying to investigate. Reminds me of The Burbs. You were talking about. You're trying to investigate the nefarious acts of your neighbor. So you're trying to sneak into his house. Well, you sneak in the first time. Let's say you find an unopened window that leads to the basement. So you sneak in through the window. Well, the next time you start it up, it will have learned that. So you will find something probably prohibiting you from going in through the window.
What console is this on?
I think it's available on multiple platforms. I'm pretty sure.
It sounds pretty wicked.
It's available on your phone even, and in the App Store. They should have a version of it in the App Store. So once again, the level of computing power available in that example, I understand that it's probably not to the point that we're talking about on a catastrophic level, but still, in a self-contained video game example, the AI is smart enough to actively learn and be able to stop you from trying the same thing. So it's a very basic example, but it's something that if that were expanded out of our control, it can very easily get to a point where we have created something that we cannot stop.
Let me ask you this. Pick between one of these two things.
Okay.
Do you want the artificial intelligence to have a self-driving car? Or would you like to have the artificial intelligence for, say, daily chores around the house?
Oh, I would vote for daily chores around the house. I'm not about self-driving cars, personally.
Yeah, I was Joe on this one. I'd rather have chores done for me.
Yeah.
I can trust an AI to drive.
Yeah. I get the science behind it.
But you trust your wife. Boom! Just kidding.
I get the science behind the studies they're doing that indicates, in a perfect world, the artificial intelligence they're programming into self-driving cars will help prevent accidents. But it ties back to the iRobot example that Will Smith provides and his survivor's guilt, essentially, that comes from that, where it's a calculation. The robot decided to save him and not the little girl and her mother or whatever in the other car because it had X percentage chance, better of saving him, where a human probably would have opted to try and save the child instead of the person.
Oh, I just think it's only going to go the speed limit. That's going to get really annoying really quick.
No, because it'll be more efficient. No one will pump their brakes.
That's also so like in theory,
true.
that's the utopia of it all,
But
right?
how-
Everyone's got one.
Let me ask you this: how many times at work do you have to restart your computer because something goes wrong?
All the time. Well, I don't. Until all of a sudden
But a guy I do.
forces me to update.
But a guy I know. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but that's what I'm
Fair
saying.
enough.
I mean, what's the difference between the car?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would all come down to numbers for a self-driving car. And once again, I understand the studies that indicate the fact that ultimately this will be a good thing, that the accidents that are taking place now, if enough self-driving cars are on the road, it can help mitigate that. But in my mind, I just can't get over the fact that it's a computer that will look at a number versus a number, and it will not be able to analyze the situation beyond that.
Correct. That's all they're programmed to do.
Yeah.
Anything else for the artificial intelligence, gentlemen?
I got nothing.
Okay. Sorry, this episode was, I think, officially our longest episode.
Was
I'm
it
assuming by now. Again, thanks for going on that rabbit hole with us. If you are still listening, by probably close to hour 2, if not past.
There's no end credit scene.
Yeah. Go out and give us a rating. 5 stars only. Tell your friends, tell your family. You can find us on Twitter at Alien and Cowboy. Email us if you have comments, questions, concerns at aliensandcowboys@gmail.com. Go out to the Facebook page. We're on SoundCloud now. Follow us on Twitter again. Get interactive with us. Let us know. We'll be back next week. We're not exactly sure if we're going to do Game of Thrones starting next week and do 2 episodes before the season, or if we're going to just try to lump it all into one large episode. So
I'm also still trying to picture of My Ugly Mug to where people won't get so turned off.
That's true. We did talk about last week putting Nate's photo up. We will be putting Nate's photo up.
Yeah, we had second thoughts.
Tonight. Yeah. We don't have second thoughts. Nate's got the perfect outfit. So until then, guys, have a good night. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.